Hi, I'm Mitch. Welcome to Future Property. Today we're speaking to Lucinda Hartley, the founder of Zeroo Home Loans and previously the founder of neighbourlytics. She talks about all things livability, how to find your first home, and also her new venture which helps homeowners purchase a new home with a 0% deposit. Lucinda Hartley, welcome to
Thanks,
Future
Mitch.
Property. Great to have you here.
Pleasure.
Thanks for giving us some time. Do you want to start first and foremost with your history in property?
I have a very diverse journey in that space. I've spent the last 20 years designing and building cities from different perspectives in housing. And I guess my training is in urban design. That's where I began, looking at the big plays of how you plan and design the future of cities. And then I've spent the past, it's probably 15 years now, building startups that solve different city problems. So I first had a services company that worked with property developers to improve vacant and underutilised spaces around the city, finding new uses like pop-up spaces and new cafes and things. Then spent about 8 years building a big data company called neighbourlytics, which looks at filling the human data gap and lifestyle and behavioural data to help understand what to build where. But through that, really learned a lot of patterns about the evidence behind how people actually use cities, not what they think they want. And I'm currently a co-founder of Zeroo Home Loans, which is a 0% deposit mortgage product for first home buyers. And so while those initiatives are all probably quite different on the surface, the common thread for me is they're really looking at how we come at solving city problems from different angles, and particularly housing problems. Housing's the biggest generational problem from Australia. We need a lot of innovation in that space.
Yep, absolutely. Talk to us a little bit about neighbourlytics, and I guess obviously you've moved on from that now, but what was the crux of how that started and why did you start it? And then what did you find out about how people want to live?
So back in 2016, 17, I thought it would be really logical to go into big data analytics with no background in that space.
Good move.
A lot of background in property and housing, but what I observed from the way that we made decisions, both as property developers, housing developers or planners. So you need a lot of data to understand how cities work. And, you're a mortgage broker. I'm sure you're looking all the time at different property data and housing trends. And we have a lot of data, but it really struck me that most of the data that we use is about the physical environment. It's about the number of houses, the flow of the traffic, the height of the building. But actually what drives property value isn't how many stories a building is. It's the lifestyle, the character, the behaviour, the demographics. It's all of the human data. And often we understand that qualitatively, but what actually makes a suburb more livable than another, and can you measure it? And so we started with that question and then built a platform that looked at a lot of new and emerging sources of data like restaurant reviews and social media and mobile phone location data to be able to actually create quantitative metrics about how we live.
Clever. What were some of the things that you found?
So some curious things for me was that some of the lead indicators for suburbs that are growing aren't just about property pricing. It's things like restaurant pricing that often jumps before property pricing does.
Interesting.
And you'll find interesting trends in suburbs that I guess they're gentrifying, for want of a better word, but they're upwardly mobile, and you'll see increase in hairdressers and breweries and coffee roasters, and these things are the lead indicators of what's coming next.
There you go. I've never heard that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the suburbs gentrifying prior to property prices.
That's right.
So we sort of catch on a little bit later.
That's right.
So you could actually notice those trends and then predict potentially what's happening.
Have a best guess of where the growth was going to be. And also looking at where people move around. We like to think that we're really mobile. Most people don't travel more than about 4 or 5 kilometres from their house.
Really? On average? Come to think of it, I don't know that.
They might go to work further away. But you can look at these, population scale movement patterns, not individual, but population scale around where people move around.
Yeah.
And they don't move very far. That was surprising to me.
I guess now you've moved on from neighbourlytics. Are you using that sort of data and intel into your next venture, which is Zeroo Home Loans?
At Zeroo, we're really data-driven. So we use different base data sets, but similar mindsets in the way that we think. So a lot of our product at Zeroo is helping first homeowners get into the market today rather than trying to save for 5-10 years when the market's growing faster than you can save. and helping them grow equity. But to help homeowners, particularly owner-occupiers, grow equity, we want to be buying in the right areas. I think, any home buyer has an aspiration to grow equity in their property. But those data models, of which there are many around, are mostly oriented towards investors. And that's great. Like, there's a huge market and a need and a demand for that. But if you're a first home buyer and you're not necessarily looking to flip your property, but you still want somewhere great to live and to grow equity, you need a different set of insights. So we've built a data model that combines the traditional data metrics for property growth, supply, demand, median price growth and other metrics, but we combine it with some of those softer metrics like walkability and density of restaurants and school zones and demographics to give a richer picture of somewhere that you really want to live long term.
Yeah. And when someone comes to you and obviously, they want to use your service, do you actually get in touch with them and actually help them find the property as well? Like, do you give them that advice?
It's really a partnership. So our home buyers can theoretically choose any property that meets our growth criteria. So they don't only have to buy very selected properties. There's a wide range, but we do have a set of criteria. And so we work with them hand in hand. We'll help them identify within the city or the region that they want to buy. Say it's in the north of Melbourne, we'll identify half a dozen suburbs that we think would be optimal within that area. If there's some that they like, then we'll look at the asset type. So, townhouses, apartments, homes, and where we think the sweet spot will be for someone like them in their budget. And then we look down at the property level as well around whether that home is going to be the right one for them. And often first home buyers, as I'm sure you find in this sector, it's really tough. There are so many decisions that you have to make about buying a home and no one teaches you any of that. And it's so much more than just getting a mortgage, although that is a critical part. But there's all these other decisions that go around it, like where do I want to live? How do I want to live my lifestyle? So we try and guide them through that as well.
Have you found that the first home guarantee scheme has pushed prices up under that mill and makes it harder for people in that range?
Yeah, I think an entirely predictable outcome of the first home guarantee is that the bottom segment of the market has jumped 10 to 12% last quarter. Now, that's meant properties that were 700,000 are now 800, 900, and that makes it even less affordable, which I think, while there on the surface is a lot of benefits to being able to buy with 5%, if you make that available to all of the market all at the same time, it has a predictable outcome of oversaturating that quartile, and I think that makes it really tough for first home buyers now.
It makes it tough for the bottom end of the market.
Yeah,
for people that probably don't need it to be tougher.
That's right.
Which is interesting move. With the type of properties you look for clients, what tend to be more preferable? Like in terms of apartments, are they showing great growth or not really? Or is it more like houses and townhouses that you tend to work towards?
Yeah, it does really depend on the area. It's hard to have a general conversation about that. I think a lot of people want house and land. It's not always affordable. And depending on where you are, I don't think it's always the best buy either. And I think the shift that I'm certainly seeing in the data, but also see in the market when you're talking to younger buyers, is the myth that it's only land that goes up in value has really been disproven. In large areas of Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, particularly Sydney, units are growing at faster rates than homes in lots of suburbs by percentage growth. And I think that that's a good thing because it makes it more accessible to grow capital growth as well. So it does vary. We've bought apartments in Brisbane, we've bought, homes in Melbourne, we've bought house and land in Perth, we've bought townhouses. So it does vary. Generally, the suburb tends to be more important for us. The postcode tends to be more important than the asset type, but the variation of those two is important.
Yeah. Do you work with self-employed individuals, pay as you go? You've got a wide range of...
We do. Actually, a huge challenge for me personally is how do we innovate in that self-employed market? Because when you think about it statistically, like 66% of businesses in Australia are self-employed. That's not a niche area. And in the past, perhaps self-employed were considered higher risk But these days, your white-collar job at PwC is no more secure than your startup. And I would actually say that people who are entrepreneurial and self-employed are likely to be far more resilient in the future of work and the technology disruption than those in traditional jobs. But our lending systems haven't necessarily caught up. That said, I don't have control over all of the credit and risk criteria that we service. And so we are very conservative as a 100% lender. And so we do self-employed, but we do need the 2 years of ATO records.
Absolutely. Now, I know we spoke off camera before around the 10% equity buyback. Do you just want to explain that for the consumers out there, how that works, what the process is, etc.?
So when I tell people that we can do a 100% home loan, I usually get a pause and a blank stare and a kind of how, which is a legitimate question. So the way that the model works is we're really keen to help home buyers, first home buyers, owner occupiers at any stage. They can be second home buyers or downsizers. Buy today, because the reality is you can't save faster than the market's growing. If you try and save for 5 years now, you're not going to be able to save hundreds of thousands, unlikely, most people. So we help you buy today with a 100% loan. The way that we're able to do that is to also help home buyers buy properties that will grow and appreciate equity, ideally faster than the average. So that's where, as we were talking earlier, some of our data analytics and our forecasting is so important to help find the right areas that are going to grow, but also great areas to live in. We want people to love where they live, to live there long term. So if we're able to see those properties grow, we target 8% growth, then after 5 years, and I'll just use round numbers for argument's sake, if it was worth $1 million today, after 5 years at 8.5% growth, it'd be worth $1.5 million. Then our fee essentially is looking at taking 10% of the improved value of the property. So of the 1.5, 10% of the 1.5, 150,000 comes to us, which is less than the deposit you would need to put up front in the first place. And the remaining 350,000 in equity is effectively the new deposit. And so when you think about could you save $350,000 in 5 years, often the answer is like no, but we can help you buy today, grow that equity, and then really homeowners are on their way and we can use that 10% to fund the deposit for the next person.
Yeah, and they're in their home, essentially.
They're in their home, yeah.
Great philosophy. I like it. I dare say you could be very busy in the next couple of years at the same time. Any locations that seem to be busier than others, like in terms of growth rates that you could, I guess, mention for consumers? Like is Queensland or Southeast Queensland going off, or is it more Melbourne starting to pick up, or what are you seeing? Certainly
Melbourne is starting to pick up. I think a lot of people are focused on Melbourne at the moment. After having a flat couple of years, the same stock is now much more affordable than it is in Brisbane, or Sydney's always been ahead, but even more so. But if we look at the rate of growth, Brisbane is still out of control.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
we think
it's going to max.
Yeah.
And then it keeps going higher. A year ago, everyone was saying Brisbane's hit its peak. And then it honestly grew 20% last year in most places, not everywhere. And it's still going up. We've worked with buyers who've now been in the market for 6 months, and in that time, the property's 80 to 100,000 more. And if you break that down in weekly terms, it's growing at about $5,000 a week.
It's crazy.
You think about how much you have to save to try and reach that. So Brisbane is still hot. My estimate of that it will continue to increase is that there is still population growth and infrastructure provision associated with the Brisbane Olympics that's real and under supply. So when you take the focus on population growth plus the infrastructure investment plus the highly limited stock, there is still room for growth in Brisbane, but it is really hard to get in. And I think that's the challenge now, the entry price. You're really looking at 1.2 just to get a foot in the door. As Perth, on the other hand, is growing at a similar rate, but there are still much more affordable pockets where you can buy in the 600s in areas in Perth. And if that's an area people are looking to buy in, that's really useful as well.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Melbourne?
Yeah, I think in Melbourne, I'd say it's very varied. So there are some suburbs that are absolutely booming and others which are still holding steady.
What sort of areas are booming?
So where we're seeing the most growth, there's areas in the, I'd say, middle to outer north. I guess your Lale or Thomastown Reservoir, a little bit perhaps in as far as Preston is growing very quickly. Out east towards like Montmorency, Upwey, even towards Emerald and some of the more, I guess, Dandenong sort of suburbs. If it's further away but very beautiful and still has the public transport infrastructure. pockets of the peninsula in and around Frankston, which has, typically been a much more affordable area, but it's so close to the beach, and there's been a huge investment in Frankston Railway Station and Hospital. That area is really transforming as well. And there's still a lot of movement in Geelong. I know Geelong's been a pretty upward market in the last 5 or 6 years, but it's still continuing to grow, and there's a lot more potential for what that could be.
It is, yeah. It's quite a popular spot, Geelong, with that sort of livability now out of the city.
Yeah.
And having that sort of coastal lifestyle. When you talk about your characteristics around livability, you spoke about the restaurants before and hairdressers popping up. Is it being close to parks? And is it the usual stuff that most people would ask for, or is there anything unique else that people actually do prefer that you wouldn't quite think of?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to trade-offs, right? Which is quite an individual question. So if in an ideal world, most people would want to live near the beach, I think, in Australia. But when you start to weigh in, okay, well, that's too expensive in a lot of cases, where else would I choose to go? And I think there's a baseline of services and amenities that you'd want to see in any location. And a lot of our analytics drives that, but that's a lot of what I think about in terms of the, future of living. So a basic amount of restaurants, doctors, shops, schools, parks, the things that you need to service your daily life. In an ideal world, you'd have most of those in walking distance. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be close to the CBD. There's lots of satellite suburbs that have those things.
Do you think that's where the future's going? Like we hear about these satellite cities that the Victorian government are trying to introduce. Do you think that's what life will be like?
I think that's what urban planners would like it to be like. That's certainly what's on paper.
Do you think that's what will happen, or will people still try and gravitate? Just your opinion only.
My opinion on that is that depends a lot on where jobs are. So what we saw with COVID and a rise in remote work, that really opened up a lot of opportunities for people to move all kinds of places. But that model only is really true for property in terms of moving far away if you're able to be fully remote. And actually most people are not fully remote. They're hybrid, and they still need to be in the city if they're working in a CBD job 1 or 2, 3 days a week, which means you don't want to be more than 2 hours, an hour and a half from the city. So they're not really, the work from everywhere philosophy is kind of broken down. It's like kind of working near work rather than working from home. So until there is, if there is, I should say, more remote work, I think that trend of being near CBDs is likely to stay. But actually, most people work in the suburbs. There's only something like 15% or 20% of jobs in Melbourne and Sydney are actually in the CBD. So most of the traffic is not people coming in and out of the city. It's people trying to get across town to a different suburban centre. Yeah. Like they're trying to get to Chadstone, or they're trying to get to Box Hill, they're trying to get to Sunshine. That's where the traffic's coming from.
That's just crossing.
It's that cross traffic. So if the more that we can build up the diversification of the city, though, I think it makes it richer and more interesting.
So when you're talking to first home buyers and their own occupiers, obviously, trying to get into their first home, what makes the right area to purchase in?
It is a very subjective question about what's the right area, because what's right for me will be different for what's right for you. But there are some fundamentals that we look for. And then within that, what trade-offs are we prepared to make? So, when it comes to buying a home, we tend to fixate on how much can I borrow, what's my borrowing capacity, what mortgage can I get, what are my repayments going to look like. That is fundamental and very important, and I'm not ignoring that for a moment. But beneath that, there are a whole lot of very complex trade-offs. So would I be prepared to take a mortgage that's further away because it's cheaper, but add an hour to my commute every day? An hour each way, that's 10 hours a week. Is that a trade-off I'm prepared to make? Or am I prepared to stay somewhere more central because perhaps, it might be more convenient for me, but I'm going to need to sacrifice space and live in an apartment? Am I prepared to raise my family in an apartment? I mean, I've done that for years. I think many people can, but it's a trade-off, and it perhaps challenges people's mindsets. So I think there isn't a right decision. I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think there's a minimum standard of being able to walk to shops and services and amenities and schools and parks and having those things nearby. Because if you don't have those things nearby, it has a huge impact on your well-being.
Yeah.
It costs you in time, it costs you your health in what's available and things like that. But you will find a basic level of amenity in lots of places. And so then it becomes your individual trade-offs of, are you prepared to trade your time? Are you prepared to trade, your community? Some people are very anchored in a particular community and they want to buy there because they want to keep those relationships nearby. And if it's expensive, then they'll need to live somewhere smaller. So these are quite individual trade-offs. And certainly when we're working with home buyers, we try to understand not just their borrowing capacity, but their lifestyle and how they want to live.
That's something I think does get missed, I think, a lot, especially with the usual broker-client relationship at times. It's like, this is what you can borrow, this is potentially a house that comes through. But people often forget that sort of might be travel time, or it's an hour out of the city, etc. And that can have a huge impact.
And I think it's, the book that I've written, which is independent from Zeroo Home Loans, it's called Finding Home, and it comes out on April 28. It's a book about helping people make those trade-offs, because one of the reasons why it's really hard to buy a home to live in, I think this is a much cleaner conversation when you're buying an investment property, because you really are just looking at the financial metrics. You're less emotional about it. But people get emotional about homes because they have an imagination about what homes should be that might not be possible in today's reality, or they haven't thought about the impact of their time, or are they prepared to move out of their community, or what would their relationships look like if they lived in a different home. And so it asks people to evaluate their trade-offs based on their lifestyle through these 10 different lenses, with the view of shifting the conversation not just from affordable housing, like how much you can borrow, to affordable living, like what's the sum cost of my life? So am I prepared to pay more for a mortgage if it means I don't have to travel time? And maybe I don't need a second car and I can put that into my mortgage. That could be one version of the trade-off. But there are many others, and there's not a right or wrong decision because it's individual. But in this market, everyone has to make trade-offs. The trade-offs that you have to make in today's market are bigger than even 5 years ago. They're bigger than a previous generation. So I think it's a false reality to say save harder and just get into the market, because we actually need to adjust our mindset of what home looks like in this market.
Good point. On the topic of finding home, what advice do you give to people who are embarking on that journey to find their first home?
So the way that we think about home in Australia, I feel, is unhelpfully tied to a particular definition of the Great Australian Dream. It's the white picket fence, it's the home in the suburbs. And that's actually a very recent idea. We haven't always lived like that. No one else in the world lives like that. So if we can reflect on why do we imagine that and why do we want that, and try to decouple this idea of suburban home as being a successful adulting and look at it instead of security and housing, then I think we have more diverse options. And I think that's what I want people to think about, that your definition of a successful home, your forever home, your dream home, doesn't have to be something that's this house in the suburbs. You can have a great life in lots of other different housing types, but the one that's right for you will depend on the life that you want to live. So what I ask people to do is, before you start looking at what you can afford, although that's a very, very important question to ask, first ask, how do you want to live? If your life is all about riding bikes and running and walking and catching up with friends at bars and cafes, why are you thinking of buying a home that's at 25 kilometres away, it's an hour drive? But then conversely, someone else, it might be like, I'm so sick of the noise and busy, I just can't wait for the quiet, I need space. Moving far away might absolutely be the right choice. So there's not a right or wrong, but it's asking the question, how do you want to live, and finding a home that's right for you.
It's a good question. Often challenges people.
It does.
Because they probably haven't asked that question.
Yeah.
Well,
none of us have, really.
Yeah.
It's very
how you actually
challenging.
want to live, whether it's, going on runs or, being close to cafes, etc., or having space. We get that a lot. Like, I want some space and I want more acreage or something like that. And people...
But why?
Exactly.
It costs a lot of money to have more space.
And then, okay, that's going to cost a lot, and then they can't afford it and all that sort of stuff. So great advice and a good question to pose to people. And I dare say you probably make people think. Have you got a crystal ball? What are your thoughts on the future of housing, notably, I guess, in Melbourne, but also across the country? Where do you see it all heading?
My view is that we're likely to have very unaffordable housing for quite some time. Our housing supply is well behind our level of population growth because we've let it get behind over the past 20 years. So if we assume that, then it's likely that we're going to see greater density, more apartments, more townhouses. And I'd love us to flip our mindset of not feeling like that's a second best choice.
Yeah.
Because if you look around the world, I don't think people in Paris are having a terrible life. I don't think people in New York City are having a terrible life. They all live in apartments. Celebrities live in apartments in LA. They're not living in homes. So if we shift our mindset that it's actually apartments can be great, then it's possible for us to have more density, which can afford living in different kinds of neighbourhoods. Yeah, living in houses are great too, but it does come with the challenge of, can you afford it?
Yeah, absolutely. Great answer. Thanks to Lucinda Hartley from Zeroo Home Loans for joining us today. A great conversation about the definition of home in this new world that we live in and what a home means to you.